Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Napoleon Bonaparte, Part 9, Defeat at Waterloo, Belgium, and Final Exile on St Helena Island. We stopped last time in 1815. Napoleon had experienced his final military defeat at Waterloo, Belgium. He had become a prisoner of the British of Great Britain and was sent on a ship to the South Atlantic island of St Helena, where he spent his last 5.5 years of his life as a prisoner of Great Britain. He arrived in Jamestown, St Helena. It was the only town on October 15, 1815. On October 17th, Napoleon disembarked. He briefly went to the Longwood House, which was being prepared for him, on the Deadwood Plateau. Longwood is in a cloud 300 days a year. It has high humidity. There were termites, rats, mosquitoes, and cockroaches. It took 7 weeks to get Longwood refurbished for Napoleon and his entourage to live there. St. Helena is an extinct volcano 2,000 miles from Europe, 1,000 miles from Africa. There were 1,200 black slaves and Chinese serving the 500 European descent people who stayed a few years at a time. It was considered to have a deadly climate, fierce heat, equatorial rain, hot and damp. The people suffered from dysentery and vomiting. English sailors who were stationed there died by the hundreds. British officials and planners got sick on St. Helena. The most unhealthy region of the island was the chilly tableland, 1,700 feet above sea level, where there were windy fogs. This was called the Deadwood area. And the house that was called Longwood was the place on the Deadwood area where the British chose for Napoleon to live and die. Previously, Longwood had been a stable for 50 years. At the last moment, it was transformed into a dwelling house. The cattle and horse dung had not been completely cleared away. Napoleon's books were attacked by mold there. Before he stayed at Longwood, Napoleon stayed at a pretty bungalow called the Briars. It was a happy time. He lived with the family of the East India Superintendent William Balcombe, and Napoleon became friends with their 14-year-old daughter Betsy. Napoleon tested her on the capitals of Europe and asked her who burnt Moscow, and then he said, "I burnt it." And then Betsy said that the Russians had burnt it to get rid of the French, and Napoleon laughed. He had fun with Betsy. They played chess. It was a second childhood for him. Betsy's mother called him by his British nickname, Boney, one day, and Napoleon said, quote, "I am not at all bony." On December 10th, Napoleon moved into Longwood with a heavy heart. He was not allowed to be called emperor there. He was not allowed newspapers. However, news seeped through. His brother Joseph had escaped Europe and reached Bordentown, New Jersey, USA. Napoleon's bedroom, there was a threadbare carpet, muslin curtains, a fireplace, painted wooden chairs, 2 small tables, a sofa, a camp bed from Austerlitz. There were many rats there. His 3-cornered hat, the rats would spring out when Napoleon took it from his sideboard to put it on. His companions included 3 counts, a baron and their families. 40 people lived with him there. After 6 years and Napoleon's death, there were only 20 people left. The Marquis Lacasse and his young son stayed for a year, and they were his most agreeable companions. However, after Las Casas left, there was a vacant place that was never filled. Bertrade was touchy, feared offending his wife. She tried to throw herself overboard at Plymouth and was miserable. Gorgod was unbearable. Napoleon had to issue a command preventing a duel between Bertrand and Gorgod. Napoleon was patient and fatherly with Gorgod. Gorgod had saved Napoleon's life in Russia during a Cossack attack. There was not enough work for the entourage. The Countess Montholon and her children left. The only loyal ones to Napoleon were 3 servants, Marchand and 2 Corsicans. The governor of St Helena during Napoleon's exile, or most of it, was Sir Hudson Lowe, and it was said that the peace of Europe depended on Lowe's watchfulness of his prisoner. There was pressure on Lowe to be brutal with Napoleon. Once Napoleon escaped and rode across the island undetected. In later years, he rarely left Longwood. He lacked outdoor exercise and his health declined. He had stomach trouble. The food was poor, the meat was uneatable, and the wine was sour. Lowe looked for new ways to torment Napoleon. A Viennese traveler whom had seen Napoleon's son Lowe refused to allow him to visit Napoleon with news of his son. However, a lock of Napoleon's son's hair reached him. Governor Lowe worked to shorten Napoleon's life. Meanwhile, in Europe, General Ney had been executed by the Bourbons. General Murat was also executed. Marie Woluska married in 1816 but died of kidney failure in 1817. Again, April 14, 1816, was the new governor on St Helena, Hudson Lowe. He was a poor governor. He mistreated Napoleon. Napoleon said to him, quote, "You're not a general, you're only a clerk." Lowe was stupid, suspicious, and jealous. He refused to allow Napoleon to receive a bust of his son. He refused to allow communication with his son. And his Napoleon II was not allowed to learn French language. He was raised to be an Austrian in Austria. At Longwood, Napoleon had a garden where he grew green beans, and Lowe became suspicious because green was Napoleon's political color. Napoleon never tried to escape from St. Helena. He had 125 guards during the day and 72 at night around Longwood, and Napoleon spent 5.5 years on the island. Once Governor Lowe surprised Napoleon in his garden and told him he needed to cut expenses. And Napoleon said, quote, "How dare you talk to me of such matters? You are nothing but a gaoler. You have only commanded brigands and deserters. I know the name of every English general who has won distinction. All I ever heard of you is that you were one of Blucher's quill drivers, and a robber captain who never had the honor of commanding real soldiers. Don't send me any more food. I will take meals with these brave fellows of your 35th over there. Not one of them will refuse to share his rations with an old fellow soldier. You can dispose of my life as you please, but not my heart. That is still as proud on this rock as it was when all Europe was awaiting my orders. You would stick at nothing. You would poison me if you had the courage or were sent orders to do so." Governor Lowe turned without a word, mounted his horse, and galloped away. Governor Lowe came one day and wanted to see if Napoleon to verify that he was there, and Napoleon refused to allow him entry and shouted from inside the house, quote, "Tell him he can bring his executioner's axe if he likes, but if he wants to enter my room he must do so over my dead body. Give me my pistols." The next time Lowe saw Napoleon was after Napoleon's death. Napoleon did receive that marble bust of his son. It made its way through. At dinner, Napoleon would dress in his old green coat, silk stockings and golden buckles on his shoes, and he would eat off of plates that depicted battles that he'd been involved in. After dinner, he would read out loud Corneille, the same plays over and over again. Napoleon spent days reading books. Before, he had no time for reading books. Before he enjoyed history, now he preferred poetry. He enjoyed the Iliad, also Sophocles' Oedipus, Aeschylus's Agamemnon, Milton's Paradise Lost, the Bible, Beaumarchais' Figaro, and the Barber of Seville. It was a happy day when a ship arrived with books. Napoleon dictated his memoirs on St. Helena, including the battles. He dictated Waterloo over and over and couldn't understand the battle that undid him. He was very busy writing his memoirs, dictating them. They were published 2 years after his death. 4 volumes. It was the greatest international best-selling book of the 19th century. He also wrote a 238-page book about Julius Caesar. There were maps all over his billiard table. Napoleon said, quote, "What a novel my life has been." He would wake up at 6 in the morning, have coffee, wash, shave, receive a massage, have lunch at 10 a.m., and bathe from 1 to 3 hours. English travelers visited him. The English were very enthusiastic. Napoleon told them that the English were foes of their haughty aristocracy. The English soldiers on St Helena loved him, and they would cheer him. Napoleon said it was a fine empire. He had ruled 83 million people, or half the people of Europe. Napoleon was moved by the plight of a Malay slave named Tobias on St Helena. He was kind to him, very sympathetic, and greeted him, gave him a gold coin. Napoleon said that adversity has its heroism. After dinner, he would read out loud Corneille, Voltaire, Homer, the Bible. He entertained visitors. On June 7, 1817, Thomas Manning, the explorer of Tibet, came to visit with Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon had health trouble. He ate little fruit and vegetables. In the fall of 1817, he had a tooth removed, the only operation of his life. He experienced depression and had no fear of death. But he said, quote, "It needs more courage to suffer than to die." Napoleon said that the persecution by England that he experienced on St. Helena added to his glory. He called it the brightest part of his fame and said that there was nobility in persecution. His mother Letizia wanted to visit him and was not allowed. She was very sad about that. His brothers Lucian, Joseph, and Jerome all went to America. Generals Murat and Ney had been shot after court-martials in France. The English increased the St. Helena garrison from 200 men to 3,000, guarding Napoleon, but the soldiers all supported him. One night, Napoleon was in a bad mood and said, quote, "Moscow, 500,000 men." He was sad, wanted to see his son. He was resigned. It was a triumph of the soul. He was living a simple life. Napoleon said that one can be happy in any station in life. One day he was riding past a field and dismounted and plowed one straight furrow. He read English newspapers. There was a report that he had hidden vast treasures. Napoleon said that his treasures were the harbors of Antwerp and Flushing, the waterworks at Dunkirk, Havre, and Nice, the high roads from Antwerp to Amsterdam, Mainz to Metz, the roads from the Pyrenees to the Alps, the Seine bridges in Paris, the Rhine-Rhone Canal, and the reestablishment of the Christian church, which had been destroyed by the French Revolution. He decided to make a garden, growing peaches and oranges. He had Chinese gardeners and Indian coolies who helped, along with French servants. It took 7 months. The garden was a wonder. It was his last miracle. In the fall of 1820, Napoleon took his last ride out of bounds. He experienced self-pity. He never needed much sleep. Now he had days of lethargy. His mother sent a Corsican doctor. Napoleon did receive news of his mother, and he gave her credit for his success, her principles and work ethic. He regretted he did not go to Corsica. He really loved Corsica, the island of his birth and childhood. Napoleon wanted his ashes scattered on the banks of the Seine River in Paris. All his hopes were on his son. Napoleon said that he was dying too young. He was murdered by the British. Napoleon said that great things can only be done by support of the masses. Napoleon said that after his death he would meet brave warriors in the Elysian fields, or heaven, including Kleber, Desailly, Bessières, Durac, Ney, Murat, and Massena, and Berthier, his generals, and he would visit with men from the ancient world, including the Scipios, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, and Frederick the Great. In 1821, his 50th birthday was sad. On April 15th, he wrote his will. Again, he wanted his ashes on the banks of the Seine River in Paris. He still felt affection for his wife, Marie-Louise. On April 26th, he vomited blood, and his last words were France, the army, and Josephine. May 5th, he died, 1821. He was buried at Torbet Spring, 1 mile from Longwood, in an unmarked grave. His remains were taken to Paris in 1840. 1 million French people lined the route of the cortege. He was interned in Les Invalides. After his death, the autopsy was performed by 5 English surgeons, 3 English army officers, and 3 Frenchmen. The British refused to allow his remains to return to France. His grave was in a secluded valley. 19 years later, they finally agreed, and And for 19 years, his grave was guarded. There were British guards for 19 years, and then his remains were returned to France. All of England talked about the barbarous treatment that their country inflicted on Napoleon on St Helena. His mother Letizia was in Rome. His son was not allowed to visit her. His son Napoleon II died at age 21. 9 years after his death, the Bourbons were ousted from France and the Orleans monarchy established. The new king ordered the return of Napoleon's statue to the Vendôme column, and Letizia said, quote, "Once again the emperor is in Paris." Napoleon's books on St Helena included Paradise Lost, Robinson Crusoe, A History of Egypt, books by Byron, Shakespeare, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. His biographer Andrew Roberts said, quote, "Napoleon Bonaparte had transformed the art of leadership, built an empire, handed down laws for the ages, and joined the ancients." In 1815, the Congress of Vienna, they fought against the liberal constitutions and national self-determination and Napoleon's legal and political reforms. The Bourbons were unable to reintroduce the old ways. Much of Napoleon's family lived under papal protection in Rome. His mother called her life, quote, "sorrows and torments." Napoleon II died of tuberculosis in 1832 at age 21. His remains were transferred by Adolf Hitler to Les Invalides in Paris in 1940 during the Second World War. Now, during the Napoleonic Wars, the French losses included in Russia 450,000 men, fighting Austria, Prussia, Italy, and Great Britain and other countries on the continent, 235,000 men. In Spain, 200,000 men. In Haiti, 24,000 men. In Egypt, 4,500, for a total of 915,000 French soldiers who died fighting under Napoleon. Another word for the Napoleonic Wars could be the British Bourbon Royalist Rothschild Wars against Napoleon, and the numbers who died in those from other countries. In Spain, 585,000 men, and Austrians lost 376,000, the British 311,000, Russians 289,000, the Portuguese 200,000, Prussia 134,000, and Italians 120,000. Total military and civilian deaths during the Napoleonic Wars ranged from 3.5 million to 6.5 million people. In Exile on St Helena, Napoleon remembered how his German teacher in Brienne treated him with contempt and said, quote, "I should very much like to know whether Herr Bauer ever learned how I made good." Napoleon blamed himself for his fall. He regretted entrusting himself to England. He regretted not going to America. He regretted making his brothers kings. Napoleon said that what makes a nation are not the nobles or the rich, but the mass of the people. He was a tolerant philosopher. Napoleon said that he had overcome anarchy, the anarchy of the French Revolution, ennobled the people, and rewarded merit. On St. Helena, he had 20 minutes with a doctor and asked questions. What is death? How would you define it? When does the soul quit the body? When does a body first receive a soul? He was very inquisitive. Regarding Egypt, Napoleon said, quote, that if Acre had fallen, I would have made it to Aleppo and enlisted the Christians, Druze, and Armenians, reached the Euphrates, then India, and established new institutions everywhere. A quote by Napoleon, "What is history but a fable agreed upon?" Another one, quote, "The men of intelligence who have changed the world have never done so by influencing the leaders, but have always set the masses in motion. He who influences princes is only an intriguer, and his results are second-rate. But he who moves the masses changes the face of the earth." Another Napoleon quote, "Honor before all. On the battlefield, a commander's business is to fight, and if he capitulates instead, he deserves to be shot. A soldier must know how to die. Have we not all to face death? My policy is to rule in accordance with the will of the majority of the people. I became a good Catholic when I wanted to finish the war in Vendée. In Egypt, I was a Turk. If I reigned over the Jews, I should rebuild Solomon's temple. My fame does not rest upon my 40 victorious battles, nor does it lie in the fact that I bent monarchs to my will. What will never pass away is my book of laws. Through its simplicity, my code of laws has had more effect than any civil codes before it. The schools I have set up are creating a new generation. I love power, yes, I love it, but after the manner of an artist, as a fiddler loves his fiddle, in order to conjure from it tone, chords, harmonies. Napoleon believed in the importance of honor. His private secretary Bourrienne was involved in a financial scandal, and Napoleon refused to admit him to the Legion of Honor and said, quote, "One who worships the golden calf may have money but not honor." Another quote by Napoleon, "Not a moment must be lost." His biographer Emil Ludwig wrote, quote, "The instinctive impetus of an overburdened but short life drives him forward. It seems as if he could not arrive quickly enough at the end of his career." More quotes by Napoleon. "Let the path be open to talent. The act of policing is, in order to punish less often, punish more severely. I am always at work. I think a great deal. If I appear to be ever ready and equal to any occasion, it is because I have thought over matters for long before I undertake to do the slightest thing. I have foreseen all eventualities. There exists no guardian angel who suddenly and mysteriously whispers in my ear what I have to do or say. Everything is turned over in my mind again and again always, whether I am at table or at the theater. At night I wake up in order to work. It is the unconquerable soul of man and not the nature of the weapon he uses that ensures victory. Put your iron hand in a velvet glove. Death is nothing, but to live defeated and inglorious is to die daily. 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Imagination rules the world. Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever. Ability is nothing without opportunity. You must not fear death, my lads. Defy him, and you drive him into the enemy's ranks. I am the successor not of Louis XVI, but of Charlemagne." Napoleon believed in the importance of morality. He said, quote, "Nothing can be worse in a ruler than immorality. He makes it fashionable and it poisons society. Nothing can destroy great principles. They will endure forever in the light of the wonderful deeds we have done. Taking it all in, what a ballad my life has been." Emil Ludwig wrote, quote, "What a man can attain through self-confidence and courage, through passion and imagination, through industry and will, Napoleon attained." Napoleon said, quote, "When soldiers have been baptized in the fire of the battlefield, they all have one rank in my eyes. We walk faster when we walk alone. He who fears being conquered is sure of defeat. In politics, never retreat, never admit a mistake. My mind is a chest of drawers. When I wish to deal with a subject, I shut all the drawers but the one in which the subject is to be found. When I am wearied, I shut all the drawers and go to sleep. Against attempts on my life, I trust in my luck, my good genius, and my guards. A man must wish to live and must know how to die. Society cannot exist without inequality of property, but this latter cannot exist without religion. One who is dying of hunger while the man next to him is feasting on dainties can only be sustained by a belief in a higher power and by the conviction that in another world there will be a different distribution of goods. Do you know what is more hard to bear than the reverses of fortune? It is the baseness, the hideous ingratitude of man. Sometime he could be misanthropic and said, quote, "In those moods I begin to distrust even my companions in arms that cause me intense suffering, and I do everything I can to rid myself of such horrible suspicions. In every battle a moment comes when the bravest of soldiers would like to turn tail. It needs but a trifle, a plea to put heart into him again." Emil Ludwig wrote, quote, "This power of suggestion has won him many a victory, for soldiers constitute the only mass to which he can speak with effect. Napoleon was a stickler for equality in the army. He was true to the revolution till the end of his career. No one was promoted unless his record in the service justified advancement. After battles, Napoleon often would stand by the wounded to see that they were carefully placed on stretchers. He would come to the campfires and speak with the men, and ask if their food was cooked properly, and laugh at their replies. Napoleon said to Metternich, quote, "Such a man as I does not care a snap of the fingers for the lives of 1,000,000 men." Napoleon regarding the battlefield, quote, "If the kings of the world could contemplate such a sight as this, they would hanker less after wars and conquest." The contagion of crime is that of the plague. Criminals collected together corrupt each other. They are worse than ever when at the termination of their punishment they return to society. The barbarous custom of having men beaten who are suspected of having important secrets to reveal must be abolished. It has always been recognized that this way of interrogating men, by putting them to torture, produces nothing worthwhile. I have only one passion, only one mistress, France. I lie by her side. She has never been untrue to me. She pours out her blood for me and lavishes her treasures upon me. If I need 500,000 men, she gives them. Napoleon believed himself almost alone in 2 o'clock in the morning courage. Courage in the face of the unforeseen, the sudden. Courage which demands presence of mind and determination. He despised the chivalrous courage of the duel, which he called cannibal courage. Napoleon said, quote, "Tact and putting all the cards on the table will do better service in diplomacy than cunning. The tricks of the diplomat of the old school are out of date. All their rogueries have been exposed long since. Nothing betrays weakness more than the attempt to deceive." Napoleon would have conversations that would last from 5 to 11 hours. He would hold forth, conveying suggestions to the world with his hands clasped behind his back, throwing out his chest against the world. Napoleon would complain about corruption, that everyone was stealing in the government, that France was corrupt. He fought the corruption among army contractors and war profiteers. Jewish people were granted equal rights by the French Revolution. On the Rhine River, Jews were doing harm practicing usury. Napoleon knew the value of Jewish traders. He summoned to Paris the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish council which had not met for centuries, and was able to arrange for the Sanhedrin to declare usury sinful. Napoleon said, quote, "When a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they and not the leaders of the government control the situation, since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes. Money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and decency. Their sole object is gain." The French Revolution had encouraged nudity in mythological representations. Napoleon wanted nakedness draped. In a square there was a fountain with a group of naiads with water sprouting from their breasts. Napoleon had it removed. He called it improper. The German people puzzled Napoleon. He feared and admired them. They seemed uncanny. He failed to see the slow-moving Germans would one day be inspired by passionate enthusiasm. Napoleon avoided dealing with queens. Queen Louise of Prussia met him once, imploring for justice. In a pathetic way, Napoleon begged her to sit down. Napoleon said, quote, "Nothing interrupts a tragical scene more effectually than this. When people sit down, tragedy becomes comedy." His self-esteem was nourished by historical parallels. His political calculations were based on history and imagination. History was his guide. He was inspired by Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Charlemagne. Napoleon said that Julius Caesar was murdered because he wanted to reestablish order by uniting all parties, and he blamed the assassins of Caesar for his early demise. He was pleased to write army orders in the study of Frederick the Great at Sanssouci. At Lombardy, he visited the Arch of Augustus. In Egypt, the Pillar of Pompey. In Madrid, he studied the environment of Philip. In Moscow, of Catherine. He compared himself to Cyrus and Charlemagne in a letter to the Pope. He acquired the Frederick the Great's sword and called it, quote, "more precious than all the treasures of the King of Prussia." Napoleon said, quote, "We must not pass out of the world without leaving traces that will commend us to the thoughts of posterity." He compared himself to Diocletian. He said that war is a game, and he had a fondness for the game. He would talk with defeated generals and who were prisoners and tell them about their mistakes. Fame was his supreme goal. On the battlefield of Henry IV at Normandy, Napoleon erected a column with the inscription, quote, "Great men love the fame of those who resemble themselves." M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, "Never was Napoleon more perfectly freed from the tyranny of his thoughts. Never was he happier than when seated alone in his box at the theater, watching a tragedy being enacted. Nothing else could restore his inner peace of mind, for he was doomed to a tragical loneliness." Napoleon Ludwig continued, quote, "He made kindly allowance for others' weaknesses, and could never resist the appeal of well-grounded sorrow. One who chose the time and place could say anything to him. He was always willing to listen to the truth." M.L. Ludwig said, quote, "From time to time, Napoleon shows an involuntary kindliness. On one of the Italian battlefields, he sees a dog howling over the dead body of its master. Napoleon said, quote, "The poor beast seemed to be asking for an avenger or begging help. I was profoundly moved by the dog's suffering. I was shaken to the depths by the howling of a dog." M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, "The First Republic of Europe, France, was again and again attacked by the European princes. We have seen how earnestly Napoleon strove for peace." M.L. Ludwig said, quote, "Since he wishes to pose before Europe as the man of destiny, he tries to work on suggestible minds like Tsar Alexander's of Russia by such turns of phrase as the following: 'It is wise and politic to do what fate commands, and to march on the road along which we are led by the irresistible course of events.'" M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, "Napoleon Bonaparte robbed hundreds of his fellow workers of health and youth because he demanded too much of them when he demanded from them what he extracted from himself. His private secretary would be sent for at a late hour and would get to bed at 4 a.m. At 7, the poor man would find new tasks for him and would be told that they must be finished within 2 hours. M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, "Imagination is the real driving force of Napoleon's self-confidence and energy. Continually at war with the calculating part of his nature, fantasy in the end brings this harborer of opposites to destruction." M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, No one was ever more wholly immersed in what he was doing, nor did anyone ever make a better distribution of his time among all the things he had to do." One of his emblems was the bee, because bees are busy. M.L. Ludwig said that Napoleon believed, quote, "A man of talent who aspires and works unceasingly can achieve everything that can otherwise be achieved through what is vaguely spoken of as genius. That genius is industry among other things. He says that work is his element, that for which he has been created." M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, "Throughout life, the imagination of this creator was troubled by the thought of the creator." M.L. Ludwig said, "To Laplace, a scientist who denies the existence of God, Napoleon says, quote, 'You should be more ready than anyone else to admit that God exists, for you more than most have seen the wonders of creation.'" Napoleon said, quote, "All systems of morality are fine. The gospel alone has exhibited a complete assemblage of the principles of morality divested of absurdity. It is not composed like your creed of a few commonplace sentences put in bad verse. Do you wish to see what is really sublime? Repeat the Lord's Prayer. 'Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory. Amen." Napoleon said, quote, "We believe in God because everything around us testifies to his existence. All that happens is written. Our hour is fixed, and no one can postpone it. There is a providence which guides all. I am merely its instrument. All things are linked together and are subject to the unsearchable guidance of an unseen hand." In a letter to Josephine, Napoleon wrote, quote, "The earth is strewn with dead and bleeding men. This is the obverse of war. The heart is tortured at the sight of so many victims." M.L. Ludwig wrote, quote, "Since most of his wars are fought from political necessity and are always conducted without hate. As soon as the fight is finished, the foes cease to exist. The New York Times Book Review wrote, Andrew Roberts' biography of Napoleon Bonaparte brilliantly conveys the sheer energy and presence of Napoleon, the organizational and military whirlwind who, through crisp and incessant questioning, sized up people and problems and got things done. Dan Jones from the Telegraph in Great Britain wrote, quote, Napoleon Bonaparte was a whirlwind of a man, not only a vigorous and supremely confident commander, but an astonishingly busy governor, correspondent, and lover too. This particularly brilliant Corsican managed for so long to dazzle the world. Bret Stephens, who won the 2013 Pulitzer Prize for commentary, said that Napoleon was, quote, a misunderstood, extraordinary man. M.S. King, another biographer, wrote, quote, we all know the story about Napoleon Bonaparte, the self-professed son of a Republican revolution against monarchy, who then installed himself as a monarch. Napoleon, we are told, was an egomaniac tyrant who tried to enslave the European continent. Led by the brave British, a coalition of the good guys banded together to thwart the ambitions of the great usurper and troublemaker of Europe. There is just one problem with this official narrative of the giant historical figure of the 1800s. It is a lie. One can easily understand the reason for the propagation of lies and slanders aimed at Napoleon being perpetuated by the entrenched monarchies of Europe at the time. Napoleon's philosophical vision of good governance posed a direct threat to their old world order of running things. Andrew Roberts wrote, quote, the French Revolution was spiraling out of control when Napoleon Bonaparte became a general at age 24. The American Revolution gave us George Washington. The French Revolution got in Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who was George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison rolled into one. A visionary workaholic, fascinated by every detail in the running of his empire, Napoleon wrote a new legal code, transformed the French educational system, created the Louvre Art Museum and the Bank of France, introduced the metric system, and rebuilt Paris. He put his stamp on an era and brought France triumphantly into the modern age. Napoleon said, quote, I closed the gulf of anarchy and brought order out of chaos. I rewarded merit, regardless of birth or wealth, wherever I found it. I abolished feudalism and restored equality to all, regardless of religion and before the law. I fought the decrepit monarchies of the old regime because the alternative was the destruction of everything. I purified the French Revolution. For these 9 videos, I read 3 books, Napoleon by Emil Ludwig, 1926, Napoleon, A Life by Andrew Roberts, 2014, and Napoleon versus the Old and New World Orders, M.S. King, 2016. In conclusion, Napoleon Bonaparte was an incredible human being who did so much for the world in bringing good government, opportunity, meritocracy, reestablishing the Christian church in France. We have much to be grateful for from his efforts. God bless Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who served France, Europe, and the whole world well. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.